learners, I am Dr. Ipshita Sashmal, Assistant Professor, Ambedkar University, Delhi. Today we are going to discuss negotiated interaction and classroom interaction competence. So let us begin with discussing the communication which goes on in the classroom. The classroom is a space for a lot of interaction between the students as well as the students and the teacher. However, it is the teacher who controls most of the interaction which happens in the classroom. When the teacher chooses multiple and appropriate strategies to manage classroom communication, it is called negotiated interaction. And this is what we are going to talk about today. Let us now look at a traditional classroom. How does a traditional classroom look like? What is the interaction pattern that goes on in a traditional classroom in India? Researchers have found that in a traditional classroom, a strict IRF interaction pattern has been observed. What is an IRF interactional pattern exactly? In this pattern of interaction, the teacher initiates a question. The teacher can ask a question to the learner to understand whether the learner has understood what she has been talking about. The learner is expected in return to respond to that question. And finally, the teacher gives a feedback on the learner's response. This is called an initiation, response, feedback, interactional pattern. Now learners, do you observe something here? Do note that teachers mostly follow this pattern of classroom communication because it is structured and predictable. However, it limits the participation of learners in classroom interaction. Also, please notice that in the initiation, response, feedback, interactional pattern, the teacher has two responses and the student has only one. Let us now look at an example of an initiation, response, feedback, interactional pattern. So the teacher says, "What is the name of Raju's friend?" Student, "Meera." Teacher, "Yes, Meera." We can thus see that for every response of the student, the teacher has two. In this way, the teacher dominates the interaction in the classroom. It is the teacher who decides what questions to ask. Sometimes she asks closed-ended questions, the answers to which she already knows. Such interactions are not always meaningful. How can the teacher break this pattern of classroom interaction? This can be done by encouraging negotiated classroom interaction. Now learners, come, let us see what you can do to encourage negotiated classroom interaction in your classrooms. It is important to break the IRF interactional pattern which we have discussed earlier using multiple strategies. What are these multiple strategies? In a short while, we are going to look at many of these strategies that teachers can use in their classroom to encourage negotiated interaction and a safe space for communication. Let us now look at some of these strategies which the teacher can use for encouraging such interaction. Firstly, the teacher can use appropriate elicitation techniques to encourage learners to participate in the classroom discussions. What are elicitation techniques? How can the teacher elicit appropriate responses from her learners? This can be done in multiple ways. For example, the teacher needs to ask more referential and open-ended questions. For example, referential questions are those which need the learners to give extended responses which are new to the teacher. We just looked at an example before we discussed this. In that example, the teacher already knew the answer to her closed-ended question. In open-ended questions and in referential questions, the teacher does not know the answer to the question. The answer can be unique and can be related to what the learner feels or thinks. It can be dependent on the learner's opinion as well. Such questions encourage learners to think critically, to give their opinions, to share their ideas, and such kinds of interaction is what makes classroom communication negotiated and interactive. Teachers can also ask appropriate WH questions like why, when, where. These questions allow learners to give longer responses which are meaningful. The teacher may not know the answers to these questions, and when the learner shares his or her opinion or ideas with the teacher, the learner ends up engaging not only with the language but with the content and the ideas of the lesson. It is thus important for the teacher to ask appropriate WH questions to encourage negotiated interaction in the classroom. It is also important to increase the wait time for learners to respond to a question. What exactly do we mean by wait time? Wait time is an extremely important pedagogic tool that the teacher uses in the classroom. When a teacher asks a question to her learners, she needs to wait or pause for her learners to think about an answer to her question. Learners sometimes take longer to think about and respond to a certain question. In such a situation, it is important for teachers to increase the wait time. This gives enough time to learners to think about their response. Next is teacher echo. The teacher often needs to repeat a response for the learners to understand it better. This provides an opportunity to learners to validate what they have heard earlier. So, for example, a teacher explains a certain concept in the classroom to her students. In the middle of her explanation, she can see some faces in the classroom which indicate to her that the learners might be a little confused. They may not have understood everything that the teacher was explaining. In such a situation, the teacher resorts to teacher echo. In this case, the teacher repeats a certain response and explains or describes a concept that she had been talking about. The teacher also needs to repair learners' responses which may not be appropriate or correct. Please note that repair does not mean correction of errors all the time. When the learner is engaged in meaningful communication, the learner may produce certain language forms that may not be correct. However, the teacher does not point this out to the learner directly. When she repairs a learner's response, it is done by gently repeating the correct response without making the learners conscious of their error. If the learners become conscious of a mistake or an error, it might get them into a frozen state. They might not then want to come out and speak in the classroom. It might inhibit them from speaking their minds. Hence, effective feedback strategies are essential to foster negotiated interaction in the classroom. Now we look at modifying speech to learners. Teachers need to use language which is at the level of the learners. For this, it may be necessary to paraphrase, summarize, and reformulate responses whenever the learners need more explanation or elaboration. Let me give you an example. When a teacher explains the meaning of a word to her students, she may use other words or language that the students don't understand. It might get difficult for the student to understand the meaning of the word being explained. In such a situation, the teacher needs to paraphrase, think of a different phrase or a different sentence to be able to better explain the concept or the word to her learners. Such reformulations help learners to feel safe and feel safe to ask questions to the teacher. It helps the learner to participate in the interaction. Now we look at scaffolding. In scaffolding, the teacher helps the student to express themselves clearly by providing them with some help. The teacher does not provide the learner with all the help that he might need, but in this case, the teacher only gives a certain amount of help to the learner that would help him or her to express themselves clearly. This could be in the form of words, simple phrases, or ideas. When the teacher thus supports the learner to express themselves clearly and freely, the learners get a certain kind of confidence, and it is then that they become participants in the classroom and engage in the process of negotiated interaction. So these are some of the strategies which the teacher needs to use effectively in the classroom to encourage negotiated interaction. Now learners, let us move ahead. Let us look at negotiated interaction and how can negotiated interaction be practiced in the classroom. It can be done at two levels. The first level is talk management. The second level is topic management. Let us first discuss talk management. To effectively manage classroom talk, the teacher needs to break the IRF sequence. We have already discussed about the initiation, response, feedback sequence a little while ago. So in the classroom, the teacher needs to manage the classroom talk in such a way that the learner gets equal opportunities to respond in the classroom as much as the teacher. It is important for the teacher to ensure that her teacher talk in the classroom is balanced with the learner talk. This kind of talk management requires the teachers to use appropriate strategies of negotiated interaction like elicitation techniques. We've already discussed many of these, like asking appropriate questions, asking referential questions instead of display questions, asking WH questions where the learners can freely express their views and opinions. It is also important for the teacher to modify the speech for learners. And finally, scaffolding is again an important strategy that teachers use in the classroom for talk management. Teachers need to allow learners to participate in the interaction. Most teachers do not feel comfortable allowing this. Teachers want to control the classroom discussion as much as possible. Sometimes the teachers are scared that the interaction might go out of her hand. However, it is important for teachers to balance the time that she allows learners to express themselves in the classroom. Asking referential and open-ended questions to allow students to express themselves freely while teaching a lesson is an important strategy, again, to allow for negotiated classroom interaction and for the teacher to manage the talk in the classroom. The teacher needs to focus on meaning rather than form to encourage learners to speak freely. What does that mean? When the teacher focuses on meaning, it means that the teacher is not concerned about the language of the learner or the correctness of the language. The teacher encourages the learner to focus on a concept or a problem. Focusing on meaning helps a learner to engage with the content, not thinking about the errors or the mistakes that he or she might make. On the other hand, when a teacher focuses on form rather than meaning, the teacher encourages the learner to look at his or her utterances from a grammatically correct point of view. In such a situation, the learner becomes very conscious of what he or she is saying in the classroom. This can act as a deterrent for the learner to speak further. Hence, it would affect the negotiated interaction in the classroom. The next level of negotiated interaction is topic management. Teachers often need to encourage their learners to choose the topic of a discussion in the classroom. There are various advantages of doing this. Learners can choose the next topic by connecting it with the present discussion. This helps the learner not only to connect his or her ideas with what the teacher has been saying or discussing, but it also helps the learner to make a decision which involves various cognitive functions. This will help in the learning process, as research shows that learners learn better from self and or peer nominated topics. What happens when a learner nominates a topic for discussion? The learner has to think about ideas that are related to the present context of discussion. Further, the learner also has to bring in his or her background knowledge or the schema to think of topics that are relevant to the discussion. This facilitates more complex and extensive output from the learner. The learner is not scared to express himself. He or she is more concerned with the topic and the meaning that he wants to convey. Finally, this can help learners to negotiate ideas and language at their level. Sometimes the teacher might feel that a certain topic could be of relevance to her learners. However, a certain group of learners might think otherwise. They might have very different topics in their mind, which they would like to discuss in the classroom. When a teacher participates or encourages negotiated interaction in the classroom, she allows a safe space for her learners to bring such ideas on the table. Now we move on to discussing classroom interactional competence, which is also called CIC. Classroom interactional competence is defined as teachers' and learners' ability to use interaction as a tool for mediating and assisting learning. This definition is from Walsh 2006. Let us discuss what we mean by this. When a teacher and a learner are engaged in communication, they use language as a tool. They have to interact with each other in an effective way so that they can co-construct meaning in the process. This interaction serves as a tool, and this is what is called the classroom interactional competence. Let us look at what classroom interactional competence focuses on. Classroom interactional competence is not about two people communicating with each other. It means communication in a group. We all know that communication in a group is very different from communication with someone one-on-one. A person who has classroom interactional competence knows how to negotiate meaning in a group using appropriate and effective language. Classroom interactional competence also focuses on the context of interaction. So what the learners say is not going to be out of context. The teacher's discourse or the teacher's language is also context bound. It is important for learners to understand this context of interaction so that they can produce a response that is appropriate to that context. Listening and understanding what others say is equally important. When someone is talking or expressing their views or explaining a concept, it is important to keenly listen and try to understand what they are trying to say. Then it is important to show the speaker that they have understood. Why is this important? In a conversation or in group communication, when a speaker is talking to all the other people, it is important for him or her to get feedback about how much of the content has been understood. A good listener thus indicates to the speaker that they have understood the content. It is important also to clarify meanings. What do we mean by clarifying meanings? A speaker needs to check with his or her interlocutors whether they have understood what he or she was trying to explain or talk about. Hence, from time to time, the speaker needs to clarify and check whether all the others have understood what he or she was trying to explain. Finally, we have repairing breakdowns. There are often situations in conversations when there is a breakdown, when two people do not understand what each has been saying. In such a situation, there is clearly a communication breakdown. A person who is a good communicator needs to know how to repair such breakdowns. Interlocutors need to come back to the conversation and start again. Classroom interactional competence is thus about confluence, or what goes on between participants in a discussion. What do we mean by confluence? Confluence means coming together. It means when people come together and interact. In the end, let us now look at how the teacher can develop classroom interaction competence in her learners. This can be done in the following ways: using language appropriate to teaching goals. 2. Co-constructing meaning by involving the learners. 3. Providing interactional space to the learners. 4. Shaping learners' contributions by scaffolding, paraphrasing, repeating, and so on. And finally, asking appropriate questions and eliciting meaningful responses from learners. It is important thus for teachers to break the strict initiation response feedback pattern found in most traditional classrooms. Teachers need to initiate negotiated interaction in the classroom at 2 levels: talk management and topic management, as we have already discussed. Finally, you as a teacher can develop effective classroom interactional competence by encouraging confluence or bringing together learners to contribute and participate in classroom interaction. Thank you.